It's Ash from Super Videos back for another comic book video. This is going to be a review for issue 169 of The Walking Dead, which was called Lines We Cross. So overall, I think this issue was a good issue. There was a lot of heartfelt moments in there, and also it was the start of a new storyline. So because of that, it was a little slower than the previous issues, but I think given the circumstances and the dialogue that the characters had in this issue and the discussions between them, it made the issue a good issue, even though it was a bit slower paced. So we started this issue with two, I would say, very powerful dialogue. The first one between Carl and Lydia, and the second one between Maggie and Rick. Now, I think for the first one, when Carl is telling Lydia about him killing Ben and what Ben did to Billy and everything, and basically saying that he wanted to take the burden on himself and things like that, I think it was a great way to show how grown up Carl is and how different he is. It shows that he kind of knew what's going on even back then, or if he didn't know, it was traumatic enough for him to remember it, to make sense of it later on when he gets older. So I feel like that was great character development, and it helped in Lydia and Carl bonding, but also it did a great job in fleshing out Carl's character and kind of moving his story forward and making him show that he's becoming a man and he's not a child anymore. So that was very cool to see. And it's even more powerful because Carl is in front of Andrea's grave when saying this. And I don't know if you noticed, but it says Andrea Grimes on the actual gravestone. So Andrea has taken Rick's last name, just as Maggie has taken Glenn's. So it's cool how you have these two very strong relationships between Rick and Andrea and Glenn and Maggie, and how similar they are in a way. So that was very cool to see. But just to finish this part, I really enjoyed the conversation between Carl and Lydia, and I really enjoyed Carl kind of sitting down and kind of thinking about the past and looking at the past. So that was very cool to see. So then the next powerful conversation was between Maggie and Rick. So we have Maggie basically bringing up the fact that Rick let Negan out, freed him, and basically confronting him in a way, and basically asking why. And Rick begins to explain that he doesn't see Negan being so different than him and everything, saying that he also killed people and everything like that. Now, although I definitely liked Rick's standpoint and things, and just to get a different Rick for a bit, because obviously Rick saying that he's no different than Negan and things like that, it shows a different side of Rick. So although I liked seeing that, I think that the whole conversation was a little flat. Although it was powerful, it could have been way more powerful if Maggie kind of confronted Rick even more, because it felt like she was kind of sitting back and she was controlling her emotions. I would think that Maggie in that situation wouldn't be so controlling of her actions, and she may even scream or maybe even try to punch Rick as she did before, if you remember. So I wanted to see that. So it felt a little bit flat for me. I wanted to see a bit more. Although it was powerful, like I said, it could have been way more powerful. Then we have the next kind of part where it takes us to the next story. So we have Eugene talking to Stephanie from the radio, from the Ohio community, and they're basically talking, and Eugene finds out that Stephanie came into contact with Siddiq. So that was kind of shocking for me. I thought that they will put it off for a bit longer, but they ended up not doing that. And surprisingly, to my shock, they ended up revealing that Rick knows as well pretty quickly as well. So that was very cool, because I think, the more they waited for that, the more dragged out it would have been. So it was definitely great for them to have Rick realize pretty early on. We have Rick basically talking to Stephanie about making a deal with them that they can go to a spot that's near the Ohio community, but it's not close enough, and then Rick can send people out, and then they can have their first contact that way. So I thought that was pretty cool, although I think it's a little bit irrational for Rick to make this plan. Although he is desperate, I don't think he's desperate enough for that. So it felt a little weird, but I do see that Rick is desperate, but I don't think that he's desperate enough to do that. So it felt a little forced. But, they end up agreeing that they can just do that, that Rick can send a few people out to a location close to the Ohio community. And, if the Ohio community likes them, they can come into contact that way. And then going from there, we find out that Dwight has something in his mind. And then Rick basically tells him that we'll talk later. And I will come back to the discussion they had and everything, but I'm beginning to be a bit concerned about where they're taking Dwight's storyline. But we'll get to that. And then going from there, we have that conversation between Maggie and Carl. Carl saying that he wants to join Maggie in going back to the hilltop and rebuilding, which basically goes back to what I said before about him stepping up, becoming a man and everything, so that was definitely cool. Then from there, Rick basically trying to recruit people to go on this mission or to go to where the Ohio community is or close to there so they can come into contact. And surprisingly, Jesus doesn't agree. Jesus is the first one Rick talks to, but Jesus doesn't agree. Jesus says that he wants to stay because of Aaron. And obviously at this point, it is revealed that Jesus and Aaron are basically a thing. Rick obviously congratulates them, so that's pretty cool. But I don't know what it is about Jesus not wanting to go, but I feel like in a situation like this, Jesus would definitely, help Rick and go with him. But to be fair, Jesus does say that if Rick is desperate enough, Jesus would do it himself. But I don't know what it is about it, but I felt like Jesus is not a character that would deny something like that. But then going from there, we have Rick kind of moving on to Dwight, trying to recruit him and send him instead. And obviously, here we have the main discussion between Dwight and Rick. We have Dwight saying that he wants to take over Alexandria and he wants to lead the Alexandrians. And although he trusts Rick, he does blame him a little bit for Sherry's death as well. Now, there's a few problems I have with this. The first bit is that it feels out of nowhere because the last issue, Dwight was perfectly fine and there was no hints or anything that there was anything wrong with him and that, there was anything going on between him and Rick. But then out of the blue here, we have Dwight saying he wants to lead Alexandria and he wants Rick to step down. So it felt a little forced, it felt a little bit out of nowhere. But also I'm a little bit concerned about what they're doing with Dwight because they redeemed Dwight and I think they did a fantastic job doing that. But now I feel like if they want to make Dwight go through this journey where he wants to lead and take over Alexandria, it's going to fade away a lot of the moments where he redeemed himself. So because of that, I felt like it would have been better for someone else to do this. I think it's definitely cool to have this story arc, but it would have been better for it to be someone else and not Dwight. And then we have a very serious ultimatum from Rick that, there's this anger brewing in him, there's this rage brewing in him, and that it's going to come out. And, he just needs a little bit of a nudge. And, Rick doesn't want Dwight to be the person to give him that nudge, that push. So that was a very serious ultimatum, and we all know what Rick with rage looks like. He ripped a guy's throat out. So that's the Rick that Rick is talking about here. So I definitely think that at the end of it, Dwight kind of understood not to push Rick. But we're going to have to wait and see, how that goes and whether or not Dwight pursues this or not. Now, just to say one overall thing about this, I really enjoyed Rick's power. I really enjoyed what Rick said to Dwight. I really liked that he didn't back down, he didn't step back, he was very strong and confident about it. So I definitely enjoyed that. I think that was very cool. Then we have a bit of a conversation between Rick and Michonne. They're just talking. Rick doesn't want Michonne to go. So it's going to be very interesting to see Michonne's storyline now that she's not going on this mission. But then we have this conversation between Rick and Carl. Another very cool conversation. I like that, Rick and Carl bond here in this specific part of the issue. They are beginning to be a bit closer than they might have been before. They may have been very close very, very early on, but now it seems like there's this gap between them. So this conversation was a big milestone in bringing them back towards each other and kind of making them bond a little bit. So that was cool. Then going from there, we have this very interesting and funny scene between Negan and Dwight. And, Negan is being Negan. He is just doing his thing. And Dwight is very angry, obviously, given that Negan kind of stepped up and gave the Saviors that speech in the previous issue. So, Dwight is not so happy about that. So that was very cool. Dwight basically escorting Negan out of Alexandria, and Negan is at this point basically going out by himself. He is going to be by himself, nobody else. He grabbed some supplies, some food and everything, so he's basically on his own. So it's going to be very interesting to see, what happens with him. But then at this same moment, we have Maggie and the others basically going out, trying to get back to the hilltop and rebuild the community after it has been basically burned down. But we have the issue ending on this cliffhanger where Dante tells Maggie that she can follow Negan to see where he goes, and then Maggie says, I won't lose track of that monster. It's going to be very interesting to see whether Maggie actually goes to Negan and what she's going to do. It's definitely very cool if Maggie actually tries to do something, tries to kill Negan. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be very cool. I think it would have been better if there were some witnesses, maybe Rick and some others, but, at this point it would still work if they go that route. They could have Maggie try something with Negan, and then maybe Carl is there to see it as well. But I think it's definitely fascinating to see how Negan is going to deal with seeing Maggie if they come into contact. So it's definitely going to be interesting. But also, going from here, it's going to be interesting to see what people are going to be sent out. It seems like Magna and Yumiko are going to be the ones that are going to go with Rick, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, when they get to the Ohio community or close to there, and, how that whole story comes about. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether Princess, who we saw in the cover reveal for 171, is Stephanie from the Ohio community, or if she's even related. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. But that's basically it for my review. In terms of a rating, I would give this issue a low-grade rating. It was definitely good for, the start of a new story and building up some new kind of developments and dealing with some things that have been lingering for a while now. So it was great to see that. So in terms of a rating, I would give this issue a low-grade rating, but it was definitely slower paced. Thank you for watching. I'll be back for another super video.